This message comes from NPR sponsor Atlassian. Together, some impossible things aren't so impossible. In fact, they become possible. That's why over 250,000 companies work together using Atlassian software like Jira, Confluence, and Trello to tackle a few of their biggest challenges. With a little imagination and a whole lot of collaboration, the possibilities really could become endless. Atlassian, for projects impossible alone. Learn more at Atlassian.com.
Hail cheaters! Welcome to the Always Cheating Podcast. My name is Josh. I'm here with Brandon. Brandon, how are you?
I'm great, Josh. Today we're talking about defenders and goalkeepers. But first, we actually went out into the world and did in real life scouting. We saw Brighton take on Newcastle at Red Bull Arena in Harrison, New Jersey. Remind me to never take the PATH train to New Jersey again. So I guess before we get into our defender and goalkeeper preview, what did we learn? Did we learn anything? Did we learn that
what did we learn? What has
popcorn
happened?
chicken is really the scran to get at Red Bull Arena?
I like this. We're just jumping right into it. Well, this is the third pod you and I have done in 6.5 days. So I think we're pretty, our voices are pretty like settled in at this point. Yeah, I think that well, first of all preseason content, everything you watch, everything you see in real life, in person, it all has to be to everything you like, kind of like, match reports that you read about. It all has to be taken with a grain of salt because we are not dealing with full strength squads on both sides. Often managers are trying different things out. Aston Villa today are playing with a 3 at the back system, right? Which Emery had hinted at going into the summer. And so we're seeing lots of things are sort of getting tried out. So, and in fact, the match that we went to was a 2-1 Newcastle victory. And if you saw that, you'd think, oh, okay, so Newcastle handle them. But in fact, those 2 goals came in the final 5 minutes of the match. And what you and I saw was a dominant, honestly, Brighton performance. Now, granted, it wasn't against a full-strength Newcastle. Neither side was totally full-strength, but Brighton had a number of starters out there. They had Matoma was out there, Danny Welbeck, who I think we can reasonably call a starter. He's certainly in the starting rotation, and Estupinan was out there. The new goalkeeper was out there. So just a lot of interesting parts. And I thought it was clicking incredibly well. I mean, De Zerbi is just a genius. Like I'm just so impressed with him and what he's done with that squad.
It seems like De Zerbi's training sessions must be the most efficient and effective training sessions in the Premier League right now, because while it was a mixed squad of Brighton and Newcastle with starters and non-starters, Brighton, just as a team, was cutting Newcastle up on the flanks through the middle of the park like it was. What's that game you can get on your phone where you cut up the watermelons and whatnot, like Fruit Ninja?
You're the phone game guy. I like to. I'm reading Wikipedia pages like almost nonstop.
Yeah. So that is what I took away was De Zerbi just has that system now fully ingrained in it with every player in his squad, and that's great. So as he rotates for the Europa games, they'll probably still be able to take it to any opposition. Newcastle was just an odd performance by them. It was really a B squad. Elliot Anderson scored both the goals. It was our first opportunity to see Callum the Truth Wilson live in person.
Didn't get a lot of service.
Yeah, he was starved for sure. And who else from Newcastle even stood out? I guess Matt Ritchie and Harvey Barnes. It may have been Harvey Barnes' first start for the club. He was active. Yeah. He looked fine.
He was active. It was a little bit like I wanted to show. Like there was a moment where he kind of had an unmarked Callum Wilson. It's a little bit like in the NBA they have this thing called Vegas Summer League. It's kind of like a rookie league, first year player. Players who just got drafted, second year players, and it's sort of famously a bad league for centers. Right, because it's kind of a guards exhibition where they get to go out there and just throw up as many three-point shots as possible and show off their moves. Yeah. Whatever. And so defenders can be a little, centers can be a little kind of starved of service. And I think forwards are kind of the same way in preseason matches, because there's a moment there where Harvey Barnes gets the ball on the left, does some of the stuff that we saw at Leicester, right, which is just absolutely drive the ball. And then Kellen Wilson's basically doing that thing where he's standing there with no one marking him with his arms out, like topping the ball. Yeah. And then Barnes basically rolls the ball to the keeper, and Wilson let him have it. That was kind of fun to see in real time. Yeah. But I that'll all get corrected as this season goes on.
Big thank you to Michelle Marlborough, our friend and supporter. She hooked us up with those tickets and got to hang out with her and her husband, John, who was a delight. And the other big moment at the Summer Series match in Harrison, New Jersey was an actual trophy presentation. Now, yeah. I mentioned a few times on the pod that I made a bet last season with a friend where I bet that Gabriel Jesus would score more FPL points than Darwin Nunez last season. When Gabriel Jesus went out for 16 weeks, I thought, well, even though Darwin's having a terrible season, I'm losing this bet. Miracles do happen, Josh. And I'm not saying it's a miracle that I was right, because I always knew I was going to be right. But I'm holding in my hand the trophy that was presented to me by Marlon, who, while you be the judge how gracious Marlon was in defeat when I read what this plaque says.
Okay.
This plaque recognizes that I, Marlon Ratner, of sound body and mind, acknowledge Brandon Kelly as the better fantasy Premier League manager. It is my deepest honor as a former Hall of Fame FPL manager with 4 top 1,000 finishes, including back-to-back top 200 seasons, to bestow this plaque with heartfelt accolades upon Brandon. I have been bested. Hail cheaters, signed Marlon. And John has actually laser engraved this on a block of wood. It looks sensational. The bet was basically just write on a piece of paper that the other person is a better fantasy manager. So Marlon really took that idea and ran with it.
I think it's great. I think, this is the kind of thing that we're all about here on Always Cheating, right? Which is make your mini leagues matter, make your side bets matter, make your whatever. There's a little bit of like betting contra. It's so funny. There's like these betting win your mini league things out there right now, and
sure.
It's like you just. If you have a little money on the side, guys, just don't talk about it. It's more of it's what PayPal is for. You do this stuff on the side.
Yeah, it's just just click the for a friend little tick there, exactly. And it's all good.
No, I've never been in a money league in my life, Brandon. Of course not. That'd be insane. But I can see how some people would want to do that. And
we
to
get
them,
it. We get it.
Yeah, we get it. But yeah, you got to be let's be a little more subtle out there, folks. It's, but I think it's go ahead.
I was just going to say, being out there in the heat, because it was hot. It's been hot here in the States for a couple of weeks now. I just suddenly got filled up with excitement for the Premier League kicking off. There's nothing like watching a match live to really get the juices flowing. And now this is the third of our 3-part player preview series, Josh. You can go back and listen to us run down our top 10 forwards, our top 10 midfielder picks. And now in this episode, we're going to talk about top 10 defenders and top 5 goalkeepers. What's the point of doing top 10? Now, just remind the listeners, Josh, how we came upon these top 10 rankings.
Yeah, the criteria that we used, right? Yeah. So this is it's basically a series of weights. They're not all equally weighted, but the weights are historical performance, high ceiling, high floor, value, right? So kind of the price that they're offering versus what we expect their return to be, squad quality. Are they fun to own? So that's sort of the make fantasy fun again factor. Not the hugest weight, but sometimes it's a little bit of a tiebreaker. And then risk factors. So injury, rotation, suspension, possibly leaving via transfer. These are all things that can ding players a little bit in the criteria. So we sent all this off to IBM, and they put it through their Deep Blue system. It cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, we'll never financially recover from this, but it was a good
cloud computing costs are going to come down in the future. I believe
we've been told that. Yeah, exactly. And so they said next year, they'll do the entire thing over for us again for only $550,000.
Okay.
And I think
we get bumped up to the enterprise level at that point.
Yeah, exactly. So that'll be a nice savings. I think this is going to end up costing us 7 figures in the end. But you know what? We love love doing this kind of content, Brandon, and it was worth the $1 million. And I don't need a house anyway. This is we're doing this for the
We're
pod.
gonna have to introduce a new Patreon tier to support this podcast.
buy us a house tier. So yeah, we're doing 10 defenders, 5 goalkeepers. Partially, I mean the keepers. We'll mention a couple people who missed the cut, but in some ways the keeper situation is pretty cut and dry. Do you want a very expensive keeper? Do you want a very cheap keeper? Or do you want somebody in the middle, right? And if you do that,
there's only 1 million separating those three
That's
levels.
True. But somehow it becomes a huge decision, and I'm interested myself in where I'm not 100% sure where I'm going to go, and I'm sort of debating between what I think are our number 1 and number 2 picks. So we'll get to that. I think we're going to do defenders first, kind of get that out of the way because I would say of all the categories, this was the trickiest one, just because there are so many defenders. Yeah. New players that have joined the league. You have defenders from promoted teams. So I would say in general, I'm a little surprised. I thought we would have more promoted teams maybe cracking the defender list, maybe the goalkeeper list. At the moment, I'm just still not seeing a crazy amount of value. I'd say there's George Baldock, the Sheffield United defender. Who is the other? There's a Luton Town defender you were mentioning to me.
Issa Kabore is a loanee from Man City, and what makes Kabore stand out as a 4.0 defender at Luton is every loan that he's gone to from City, he's started. He started for Marseille last season, scoring 1 goal for them. So he plays on the right where Amari Bell plays on the left. So you could see 2 starting 4.0 fullbacks for Luton. This is our guess at this point. Now, if you go back a few seasons to John Lundstrom, one of the most legendary 4.0 defenders to come into the game. He came up with Sheffield United the last time Sheffield United was promoted, and he ended up playing out of position in the midfield, almost an attacking midfield role. Yeah. So what happens with promoted teams is often they'll just serve up a surprise that is harder to anticipate until we get to game weeks 2 or 3. So the advice typically on a 4.0 guy is just take a gamble on one. If you get the wrong 4.0 guy, be prepared to immediately jump on the one that's going to be the clear runaway favorite.
Yeah, because in theory, we are trying to look all the way through to the end of the season, and it would just be kind of ludicrous for us to have like a number, like a Luton Town defender 7th or something like that, just on pure speculation and value alone. And I think one thing I think you'll also find as you look through this is that there are a lot of 4.5 million defenders out there, both fullbacks and center backs, on teams that are quite good, teams that are playing in Europe this year. And I think that there's a lot of, if you can just go up to 4.5, assuming it kind of depends on what kind of sort of team you're putting together. I'm going back and forth myself a little bit. I actually am currently in a 4-4-2 template. Well, so we basically where we are right now, Brandon, we're going to do something midweek to be determined. We might up with some more of these baseball cards. Let's see what happens. We're gonna figure something out. And then next Sunday is our game week 1 preview pod. The season is that close finally. So the game week 1 pod, we're going to reveal our teams, or as close as we can get to what those teams will look like. We'll do another pod at midweek for our Patreon supporters. That'll be more of like a team reveal, last second advice sort of thing. So that's just sort of a roadmap for the next couple weeks for us as we get close to this. It always feels so far away when we start doing this pod content, and then suddenly it's like boom, it's right there.
So let's do a quick plug for the Patreon, Josh, since you brought it up. Patreon.com/always cheating. What is this? Why do we keep pushing it? Well, it is our listeners' way of supporting us financially, so Josh and I can continue to do not 1 but 2 pods a week. So if you become a Patreon supporter, you get an extra ad-free podcast every Thursday evening before the game week deadline, and you also get access to our Discord where we can talk strategy. You can talk directly to me and or Josh, or just hang out with our supporters who are great managers in their own right, talk strategy, talk movies, food, whatever you want. And
find some mini leagues, money or otherwise.
The hashtag Make It Interesting that you brought up there.
Brendan, you join our Patreon, you're going to make money. right? Because you're going to join all these mini leagues. None
All
of them
right,
are
no
sponsored by us,
promises,
of
no
course.
promises,
Oh, that's
no
true. Then we're into like sweepstakes territory or whatever. All right, forget that. Yeah, legally, I did not say any of what I just said.
The promise is it's a way to say thanks and get a lot more FPL content in return of the always cheating variety. And who is our newest thank you this week, Josh?
Damian Zillis, and we got quite a number of new Patreon supporters this week, but I think we covered most of them on the midfield pod that we did late last week. So thank you again to all of our newest Patreon supporters, and patreon.com/alwayscheating. Support the pod, even if you're not listening to that second podcast each week. It's really just a way to support us and say thanks for creating the podcast. So. Brandon, I also wanted to quickly mention the Always Cheating Super League. Sorry, normally this housekeeping. I don't really like that term. It sounds like something I wouldn't want to listen to if I heard the word housekeeping, But just a couple quick notes because we're still in the preseason. We want to note the Always Cheating Super League now is the time to get in there. The winner gets the pick of their choice from the Always Cheating shop, including the new not mugs, the new glassware. We have actual glassware coming to the shop, right, Brandon?
Yeah, we just announced that at the Volkswagen and Producer Patreon tier, you get a free 16-ounce pint glass with the Always Cheating logo on there. They look cool. And those will be making their way into the online shop at some point early this season if people want to go buy them.
Yeah,
so that's cool.
Hoodies and T-shirts and more. So you can join the Super League. If you go to alwayscheating.com, our website, there's an auto-join link at the top. You can also put in code A63ECL. And finally, we wanted to thank our supporters for our preseason content, Fantasy Football Hub. You can go to fantasyfootballhub.co.uk/always for 50% off membership at any tier. Brendan, I get a little email ding every time somebody uses that code, and they've been coming in fast and furious, and so that's a very cool thing. Sounds like a lot of people are taking advantage of the 50% off offer. So go do that. You get expert content from some of the smartest, most interesting, but also just like best managers. I mean, Ben Crowell alone, not only does he create all of this content that helping us sort of guide through the blanks and the double game weeks. He's also one of the probably 5 or 10 best managers in all of fantasy, and so he's there talking with people and helping guide them in strategies. A lot of other great people involved in the hub as well. You can win your mini league and win your mini league or get your money back is one of the guarantees. You can go to the website and learn more about that. Get your team rated for free. And the thing that you and I both love is the access to the Opta data. Digging through there. Not everyone can spend $1 million on Deep Blue, Brandon. And this is a way to get in cheap. It's a workaround. Exactly.
Yeah. We'll talk. Yeah. Well, we're data sort of friendly. We're not data heavy on always cheating, but a resource like that through the hub is always like the most meaningful tiebreaker if you have a tough transfer decision to make one week, or you just want to say, are my eyes deceiving me? The matches I watched this weekend, do the stats reflect what I think? And you can kind of like marry all of these things to make some great decisions throughout the season.
We respect and fear data, don't we, Brandon? I think that's the right way to put it. All right, so let's take a break. We'll get back and start talking about our top 10 defenders for this season. All right, Brandon, we're back. Top 10 defenders and goalkeepers for the new season. We're going to kick things off with defenders. A couple of opening notes here. I mentioned this at the top, but it was very hard to limit it to 10. We did it just for cleanliness. Keep clean, Brennan. That's what ever since COVID, I like to keep those hands washed and stay safe. So we want a clean list as well.
That's the reason why we mark this every episode of this podcast is clean.
Exactly. It doesn't have that parental advisory on there at all. I think we even cut out the swears, Brent. We're actually cursing almost nonstop over the course of these pods.
That's true.
But you cut them out so judiciously. You wouldn't even know that they were cuts. Value was certainly a factor here as well. There were a lot of great defenders, players that will be in many squads that just didn't make the cut, A, because we were stuck to 10, and B, because we were trying to factor in value here as well, like players that you might actually realistically have in your team. If this was just a listing of how many points we thought the top 10 would have over the course of the season, then the list would be a little different and would mostly be top 4 teams, right? Top 4 or 5 teams. A couple people just missed the cut. Saliba, Fabian Schär, Ben White, who I think is just that 5.5 million bump, just that's really what hurt him there. So again, that's where the value, it's just not as good value anymore. And Ben Chilwell, who I don't know that I'm having him early on. Will I have him by game week 4? Let's see. I think it's very possible. So there's a handful of people who just missed the cut. Who else, Brent? I know that you and I weren't totally eye to eye with our feelings about some of these defenders. Is there anyone who didn't make the cut that you want to give a little bonus shout out to here?
Yeah, well, I guess it's kind of funny to me that João Cancelo is on this list, though he's been like popping up preseason, getting minutes, had an assist to Erling Haaland. And then Reece James is like the highest ceiling defender, but because we all have previous with Reece James, he has found himself 25th on the list.
He got dinged on both the injury risk. I think he got like the highest possible ding you can have on that. And also we had to ding him on the fun factor a little bit because it has not been fun owning James the last year and a half or so.
When it actually is fun does not make up for the times that are more frequent when they're unfun. What I've enjoyed with one player that we're going to mention near the top of the list, and Reece James, is this preseason has been like a political campaign for some clubs where it's like Reece James is like, I'm not saying I'm running for captain of the club. I'm just saying it would be an honor if I were to be considered captain of the club. And I'm like,
Reece James camp. That's
who asked
interesting.
You?
Yeah,
I mean he's a great player for the club. I feel like there is a Chelsea listener out there who like hates my guts and all his my preseason jawing in Chelsea's direction.
The team that. It's a little bit of the team that you say the worst stuff about is always Everton for some reason. I don't know why you've never been meaner than when you're talking about Everton. So we'll see if that changes on.
But looking at the other defenders who missed the cut, they are going to all, I think, surface as we chat about the top 10 because they share clubs, and it's going to be this person in the top 10 position could be replaced by their colleague, the same club that is farther down the list.
You mentioned Cancelo, by the way. He's not in the top 10. You think he should have been in the top 10?
Oh, no. I just think he's just an interesting player to highlight as we get into it. No. I mean,
is he even going to be in the squad? It's a weird one with him, right? I
mean, stranger things have happened. We don't know if João Cancelo just showed up and said to Pep Guardiola, like, mea culpa, please let me back in. Has Pep changed the system so much that João couldn't play in that inverted fullback position? He probably could. So, I mean, don't be surprised if somehow it works out and João Cancelo is back getting minutes in the Premier League under Pep.
Or if not for them, then for somebody else, right? It's I was just googling Cancelo to see if there's any like last 24 hours news. Arsenal have been told that Man City want to sell Cancelo ASAP. That's in inverted commas. So there you go.
Sure, replace Zinchenko with João Cancelo. I think that's the move for Arsenal. Out with one Man City purchase and in with the next.
It's like, would you want? I mean, I guess if you got him at the right price, but he feels like he's a lot of trouble. There's a lot of. All right, Bayern Munich basically didn't play him at all once he moved there, right?
If it were my club, I'd have a strict no bad apples policy.
Yeah, it's always the classic, like, he's not a bad apple, he just wants to win so much. But it's like, you have to kind of sublimate your whatever. Okay, let's leave the Cancelo.
That's what you say to your potential boss in a job interview. Like, my greatest weakness is I try too hard, or like,
exactly.
I'm a perfectionist.
Yeah, sometimes I sublimate my ego too much for the sake of the team. All right, let's kick things off then with number 10, Rico Henry. Now, I fought for Henry. This was one of the trickier ones on here. My case for Henry, here's a couple things. 4.5, so good price. He's 7% owned. He had 37 starts last season. I think he had roughly the same the season before that. He's a very consistent starter for Brentford. He's an incredibly stable player in a stable and trustworthy Premier League squad. And I say that with or without Raya. I think even without David Raya, I think that they that the stability should be in place. And he gets a little extra bump because he's 0.5 million cheaper than me. He had 0 goals last season. He had 2 extra. He had 1 really golden chance last year where he really should have scored. But I think you're kind of getting. It just sort of depends. Obviously, if Raya moves, I mean, this is just today we got the breaking news that Arsenal are now in talks with Brentford over David Raya. So we will see what happens there. If that does happen, I'm sure that Brentford have a plan for what they'll do. But that causes a kind of little bit of chaos up and down with both Brentford and Arsenal. But even still, I think that it's not that I think Rico Henry is absolute fantasy gold, but he's just incredibly trustworthy. Like, you can just have him in your squad for pretty much the entire season. He's going to end up with a very solid points tally. He's going to chip in 3 or 4 assists, might get you a goal or 2. He's going to start most matches, even in a double game week. I think you're going to feel pretty confident in him. So that's sort of why I've got Rico on my list here.
Yeah, it's all fair, and I like Rico Henry, the player. My issue with I forced you to put him farther down the list because I'm dubious of Brentford here in the preseason. I just think Brentford are going to take a little bit of a tumble. It does go back to the goalkeeper conversation, which we're not even in the goalkeeper section yet, but they've been starting
together though.
Yeah, they've been starting with this dude Flecken, who I think is a complete pretender as far as I can tell.
I think he's pretty Flecken cool. You don't think so?
And then so Raya moving, and he's not even been with the squad the last couple of weeks here in the U.S., so he's gone. Like, there's just no way he's as far as I'm concerned. Bayern Munich was another team that was on the list, and then Ivan Toney being out. So, Thomas Frank, we trust him. He'll be able to, make lemonade to a degree, but I just think that's just one too many bits of turmoil at the club. And I think the first thing to typically go in that situation for a well-rounded, Brentford can be they can be a good defensive team, but I think that stems from them just being a really well-rounded outfit. It's not like they're a Stoke or a Sheffield United or a Burnley where they're just incredibly stout defensive unit. And also Raya chipping in with some incredible, clean sheet saving saves. So all this put together, I'm wondering if there's another place to go with my 4.5 defender.
I think that's fair. I guess I would push back a little bit on the idea that that they're not somewhat defensive minded. I mean, I think it's more that they're not kind of all defense the way that some of the maybe bottom half. They're an interesting spot because they just have a very solid midfield and a very stable backline, right? You have I think with Pinnock and me, you have 2 very solid, stable center backs. Me, unfortunately, is priced at $5 million, which if he was 4.5, I probably would have had him in that spot over Henry.
Yeah, I like me too.
And you like the Me Too movement, Brandon. It's been very, very powerful and important. But I think Pinnock and Henry. That's kind of there. I guess I just tilt towards Henry because he starts as much as Pinnock, and in general, give me the fullback over the center back, right? I often don't find that to be the case. I often like to have center backs as my, if I'm going to have a cheap person I'm sticking the back on my bench, I typically want it to be a center back because they just start all the time, right? Whereas fullbacks can get rotated more, but that just really hasn't been the case with Henry. And this goes back to his time in the championship with Brentford too. So very solid player in that club. And I guess solid is just the key word. And so maybe this is a slightly boring pick for number 10, but there's just the kind of guys that you can win a mini league based on, right? It's just, you're going to get minimum 2 points. He has a pretty high floor, I'd say too. Like he's not a red card magnet, right? You can basically count on 2 points from him, and then every now and then you're gonna get an assist, a clean sheet, and a 12-pointer, right? And maybe you get a couple of those a season, and that's enough to jump into whatever, top 3 in a mini league or something like that.
Okay, that's the best case we can possibly make for Brentford at the moment. Well done, Rico Henry. You're in the top 10.
If you're Ben Chilwell listening to this podcast, what do you think about me making that long case? But again, it's about price and value. It's not just about who's the best.
Totally, yeah, and that is like tip number 1 to new fantasy managers is don't try to use fantasy as a way to show you know more about football than anybody else, because this is hardly knowing who the best footballer is. It's who works best in your fantasy team. Which brings us to number 9, who is Kieran Trippier. And this is a case in point of how our model and how IBM does their tricks, where this guy getting bumped up to 6.5 has caused us to completely reevaluate the Kieran Trippier phenomenon and ask ourselves, is it worth it? Yeah.
Yep.
Is it worth it?
I mean, what do you... I don't think it is. I mean, I honestly can't imagine having Kieran Trippier. I have to be honest. I mean, I just think at 6.5 million, given the way if he had been as incredible as he was the first half of the season and that had lasted the entire season, I maybe would feel a little bit differently. But early on, it almost became a joke. It was like he wouldn't get an assist or a goal, and they would concede, and he would still get 3 bonus points. It was like
ridiculous.
His floor was insane. Yeah. And then the second half of the season, who knows why? If it was I don't know, who knows, right? It was just like a kind of the end, like, this sort of new squad. Maybe there was a little bit of exhaustion. I don't really know. But they stopped keeping clean sheets, and the attacking threat wasn't quite there, to the point where you really just didn't need to have Trippier down the stretch. He wasn't really a must-own player. And for for a defender to be priced at 6.5 million, it's hard for me not to hold on to that idea that he just wasn't really an essential player the last half of compare that to someone like Trent Alexander-Arnold, who we're going to talk about, closer to the top of the pot. He's $8 million this season, which is an incredibly high price. But any week in fantasy where you don't have Trent Alexander-Arnold, who he's playing, what he's up to. You're tracking that match to see what he's doing, whether you own him or not. And Trippier was not that kind of player down the stretch. And so 6.5 is a bit of a killer, especially when you can get, going into this season, a starting Newcastle defender for 4.5 million, right? You can get someone like Sven Botman for super cheap.
Yeah, and that's it. And I think there's more value in the Newcastle defense if we do decide that we trust the Newcastle defense. I would say Newcastle's fixtures to start the season aren't my favorite. They have Villa at home in game week 1, followed by City and Liverpool back-to-back. Then it's Brighton, Brentford before they get to a better run. So I don't see a lot of clean sheets in the first month when we're like pre-early wild card season.
He's 35% owned. I mean, it's funny because his ownership is quite high. It's going to hurt if he scores a free kick goal in the first. I'm actually surprised he only scored 1 goal last season. Like, looking back, I just would have. I mean, that was at least in the Premier League. Maybe he scored a couple in other. I didn't check out every cup competition, but only 1 Premier League goal last season. It felt like he offered a lot more goal threat than that, just on free kicks during the course of the year.
High ownership on a player like this just makes me hope that I'm right, because then his price will drop by the time I'm triggering that early wild card. And if things are shaping up better than we think for Newcastle, then there'll be an easier way in with Kieran Trippier. So keep bringing him in, newbies, and then you can drop him in game week 3 when you've got nothing from him. That's how it works.
All right, let's go on to number 8 here. We're just flying through these, Brandon. We're just, we're peak form right now. John Stones, 5.5 million, 25% ownership. That's a little high. 2 goals, 2 assists, and inexplicably just 7 clean sheets kept last season. So to talk about John Stones is to talk about kind of all the Man City defenders, and the question is it worth owning any of them? And if so, it's probably him, right? He would be he'd be your go-to Man City defender pick.
I'd say John Stones in the Premier League is one of the most well-rounded defenders. I mean, and you can see that just in he can play in so many different positions. He's played in fullback and he's played center back. Now he's playing that inverted midfield role. But then you just look at these fantasy returns: 2 goals, 2 assists, and just 7 clean sheets for the best team in the division last season, treble winner.
Yeah.
It's like, talk about no value. There's just zero value in the City defense. And even if other models than ours would say City have the best clean sheet odds going into the start of the season with their own really good fixtures, I kind of don't care.
Yeah, it's too bad we really don't have that attacking fullback like we've had in Cancelo the last couple seasons. I mean, we were just talking about Cancelo a minute ago, and he's just clearly that is not a player we want to consider early on because it's. I mean, who knows? I guess if the Community Shield takes place next Sunday and Cancelo's out there starting and Pep reaffirms his love for him and all is forgiven, okay, fine. Maybe Cancelo enters back in.
We cannot replace him.
Yeah. At the moment, it's. I guess Ake maybe deserves a little bit of consideration here. He has been shown to have a little bit of versatility, right? He can play as a left-sided fullback, or he can play as a center back, and so maybe that helps his security of starts, at least going into the Champions League. But it is not super fun to go into the season with having any of these Man City center backs or fullbacks, whatever, and just thinking, okay, like let's hope I can get a couple starts out of these guys. It's just you never feel great about it, and so I'm not positive. I have Stones in my squad right now, but it feels like that might be like a little bit of a template pick. Maybe it's kind of seeped in because I've seen other people do it. I don't feel very excited about having Stones in my squad, I have to say.
I tried all last season to make it work with Ederson, with Akanji, and City are so good that they are just always in the opposition side of the pitch. They're so high. One mistake and the opposing team is in on goal, and they're not exactly like fresh and reactionary in the 85th minute, and that's when all the miserable clean sheet wipeouts happen, and that's why I just don't want any part.
And again, because there's not a go-to fullback option right now, it's with someone like Cancelo, the clean sheets didn't matter quite so much because you were still. The chance for an attacking return was ever present. I mean, he had 11 assists a year and a half ago. So, that absolutely makes up for any lost clean sheets. All right, let's move on to number 7. Another interesting one, Zinchenko. Now, speaking of Man City, former Man City player, now a left back for Arsenal. There was always this talk that maybe he would move into the midfield once things got settled in at Arsenal. That really never happened. I'm not sure he played in midfield even once last season. Fully enmeshed in that left back, fullback spot. I think that, and I guess that could maybe change now. It sort of depends on what happens in central midfield, right? It sounds like we're going to see Havertz in that midfield role, but maybe that could be a spot where Zinchenko ends up at some point. Kind of depends on if Gabriel Jesus got injured. Maybe there's some kind of like cascading effect where Havertz plays as a forward. I don't know, but so what do you think about Zinchenko just in general?
Yeah, and Timber, who has just come onto the club, he was playing on the left, I believe, against Barcelona the other night, and it was him and then Ben White on the other side. There's so many threats to all these positions suddenly at Arsenal. That said, if we got the all clear that Zinchenko was going to be preferred in the starting 11, I just really like how all action he is, and I like how versatile he is in the attack when he can come inside or go outside. 5 million. I feel like I'm going to be more excited about Arsenal once we get to another name on this list where I just think where we can get more stability. Arsenal is also an interesting defensive conversation. I mean, I wonder where they're going to be at with total clean sheets.
Yeah, why don't we we haven't really done this with our preview pods that much, but I think we might as well just have that conversation now. Why wait until we get to? So we have Gabriel at number 4, right? And so Gabriel gets the bump over Saliba because of goal threat, over Zinchenko because of stability, and over White because of price. So those are the 3 factors that put Gabriel at number 4. We have Zinchenko at number 7. I think that's an appropriate spot for him. Yeah. But Zinchenko was dinged a little bit by injuries last season. I would say less rotation than injuries. I mean, obviously, he does have a couple of players who could play in that spot, but I see Zinchenko as a very, very stable part of the starting 11 for for Arsenal. And so I do wonder if, I mean, Zinchenko's at 11% ownership, Gabriel's at 20. I mean, it's pretty close. You're not really getting, if you went for Zinchenko, it's not like this is like a huge value pick. But I do think there is a kind of world where Zinchenko is much better from an attacking perspective than Gabriel, right? I mean, Gabriel is very threatening on set pieces, but Zinchenko, I mean, we've seen it with Man City, we've seen it with the Ukrainian national team. Like, he can absolutely score, he can get assists. So I do think that this is like, of these two players, it'll be very, maybe if you include all four of the kind of starting backline for Arsenal, it'll be very interesting to see where all of them are in January if we revisit this list, like how many points all of them have, what their ownership looks like. I mean, we could be very surprised, I think, by what we see in January.
I think Gabriel and Saliba are interchangeable. In this case, you could put Saliba at 4, Gabriel at 4. It's just going to depend on who's in the right place on the set pieces at any given moment. The thing I really like about Saliba is he's better at collecting bonus. If it's a 0-0 draw, Saliba is probably going to end up with more points than Gabriel, and that's really appealing to me at the same price. And again, I think the back four was stable for Arsenal last season, but the introduction of Timber, I think, could be mass chaos.
Yeah, that's true. With the Champions League, maybe that does create a little too much chaos to make Zinchenko fun, even as a kind of speculative pick. You and I are not XG obsessives by any means, but I do think it's worth noting when comparing Gabriel and Saliba that Gabriel had more than 5 XG last season, and Saliba was at, I think, just shy. He was at 0.91 XG. So, again, not the end-all be-all, but I think that does maybe indicate that Gabriel has a little bit more of a knack for scoring on set pieces. And I think that is a good tiebreaker between those two. I hear you on bonus points, though.
Sure.
Also, it feels like Gabriel's a little more likely to do something really stupid, like pick up a yellow card or concede a penalty than Saliba is. So that is maybe a factor as well.
All right, so we've traveled forward in time to 4th place. Now we'll travel back in time to 6th place. Yeah. I'm excited to talk about Aston Villa here because they just wrapped up their final summer series game against Brentford and drew 3-3. There have been like no clean sheets of any kind in this summer series. Brighton did have one with our guy Jason Steele. But Tyrone Mings we have at number 6, $4.5 million. So the value is quite decent for a team that could be going to an even more stable defensive shape under Unai Emery. 15% ownership shows there is some excitement and enthusiasm about Villa here, and they're going to be fighting on the European front as well. But I think Emery's whole soul is clean sheets. I think he's the fantasy manager that we really want in the Premier League right now when we're thinking about our defense. Yeah. Right alongside Tyrone Mings is going to be Pau Torres, who is a new center back that Emery signed, who he managed at Villarreal when they last won the Europa League. And so it's been Pau Torres starting alongside Konsa and Mings. I think Mings is in the center, Pau Torres is on the left, and Konsa is on the right. If they go to 2 center backs, it feels like it's going to be Mings and Pau Torres, and Konsa is going to be the guy that gets kicked to the bench. All that said, it's kind of like a similar Gabriel versus Saliba conversation for Mings and Pau Torres, where they will probably be interchangeable with the understanding of who's going to be better and more threatening on set pieces. And Mings certainly has proven that he can score on set pieces. So he's good. I think he's justified in 6th place here.
Yeah, I thought he would come in at $5 million this season, and I think again 4.5 just makes him it's like I need a synonym for value, so I don't just keep saying that again and again and again. But it does feel like you're seeing, 3 consecutive seasons with 10+ clean sheets for Mings, which is, I think, a nice, points to a little bit of stability in the squad. He's not the captain of the squad, that's John McGinn, but it feels like he's a very important part of that 11. And so even if there is some rotation risk with Torres, also they are playing in Europe this year, and I think it's the European Conference League, right? So I think I don't know how much they'll be playing for the first 11 in the maybe early matches there, so not too much of a factor. And so they will need a little bit of squad depth. And I'm not sure that means that Mings doesn't start though early on. I think that maybe Torres gets some of those starts early, maybe works his way into the squad a little bit.
So people will be wondering, listening to this, why are we talking about center backs when you've got like Matty Cash on the right, Alex Moreno on the left? Alex Moreno is coming back from a hamstring injury, supposedly be out for another month once the season starts. So he's kind of off the table. But Matty Cash did score against Brentford today, and he almost connected with Watkins on a really nice build-up move. So what's the deal with Matty Cash in your mind? Can I sell you on him? 4.5 as well, 4.3 ownership currently. So he's definitely flying under the radar.
It's true. I mean, I guess the case for Cash is very similar to the case for Rico Henry. I don't know why. It's like I almost feel like, I mean, he was a little too expensive last season, so maybe that's a factor. I think he came in. He was $5 million last season, and I've just like never owned him in fantasy, and it's never hurt me. And so, to a certain degree, I'm just like it. Whereas Mings has hurt me time and time again over the years. There's random 15 pointers from Mings, and other people owning him in fantasy, and so maybe it's like there's like some sort of pain quotient here or something like that. But I do think it's a useful. Maybe it's a dumb way to think about it, but it's a useful way for me to think about it sometimes, which is basically it's like comparing Trippier and Trent earlier on in the pod, right? It's just who's going to really hurt you if they do well, and it just feels like, and maybe I just feel like Mings is a little more stable. Cash, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. If you want to sell me on Matty Cash, Brendan, go ahead. I for whatever. It wasn't like he was 50th on our list. He just wasn't quite he didn't quite crack the top 10. Maybe for historical track record reasons, he got knocked down a little bit.
Well, that's it. It's the historical track, which means I can't make the case for Cash. I think the way Villa are going to play and the historic output from a player like Cash versus Mings this is just one of those weird situations where you're just going to get more fantasy points from a center back if you buy into Villa. I mean, Cash did score 4 goals in the 21-22 season. If he could build on that this season, then he could quite easily blow Mings or Torres away. But I'm just not I'm not optimistic.
Yeah, it's like I just don't feel good about it. I don't really know why, but we'll see. I think there's a case for Cash. A case for Cash. That sounds like like a mystery, like I don't know, one of those like a Lee Dayton mystery.
It's a true crime game show, is what that is.
What's up? It's Kaylee Cuoco. When it comes to travel, we all have a happy place. I just went to my happy place. I just went to Maui, and it was truly amazing. Priceline has always been about getting you to your happy place for a happy price with deals you really can't find anywhere else. Like up to 60% off select hotels in Costa Rica or 5-star hotels for 2-star prices in Cabo.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Atlassian. Together, some impossible things aren't so impossible. In fact, they become possible. That's why over 250,000 companies work together using Atlassian software like Jira, Confluence, and Trello to tackle a few of their biggest challenges. With a little imagination and a whole lot of collaboration, the possibilities really could become endless. Atlassian, for projects impossible alone. Learn more at Atlassian.com.
Spending some time reconnecting with nature this summer? Here's a camping hack from LL Bean to make your next trip the best yet. When putting together your gear, wrap a piece of duct tape around your water bottle. It's barely noticeable, but if another piece of gear breaks or tears, pull off your tape to make a quick patch or repair. For more camping hacks, visit youtube.com/LLBean. LL Bean. Be an outsider.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. What if your life story was a podcast? Would it be a comedy or a thriller? Whatever genre, State Farm is there for your what ifs to keep your life story from becoming a mystery. Because when you've got questions, they've got answers 24/7. You can file a claim on the State Farm mobile app or simply give your agent a call. It's how insurance plays a supporting role in your story. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Visit statefarm.com for a quote today.
All right, let's move on to we're just flying through these, Brandon. Let's move on to the top 5. Okay, in 5th here, we've got some heavy hitters here. We already talked about one of those heavy hitters in Gabriel at number 4. So we're going to go from 5 to 3 and just try to stay with us, Brandon, as this gets wacky. We got Lucas Shawski in 5th place. Luke Shaw for short. He shortened his name at some point, Brandon, the Polish footballing legend.
Yeah, just so he could get his British citizenship to play for the England national team. I think that's what it was. Yeah, exactly. He 5.5 million, 32% ownership, 1 goal, 4 assists, and 12 clean sheets. The 0.5 million bump does ding him just a tiny bit. Doesn't offer quite as good value, I think, as some of the others in and around. I don't know. I mean, he should battle. I think he'll benefit from a more settled team, improved midfield. In some ways, 5 was about as low as you could put him. Right? I don't think you could put him any lower than that. He's a fullback who's on set pieces on a very strong defensive team that should get even better with Onana. 5.5 feels like the right price, so it's not like he's not terrible value exactly. He can be a frustrating player to own in fantasy at times. I found I'm not quite sure why that is. And, tell me more about that.
I don't know. It's like maybe it's like you always hope you're going to get a little more out of him, and it feels like. So maybe it's more like there's like a frustration component there. I don't know. It feels like I'm the one like pitching you on all these players for some reason. You tell me. What do you think about Luke Shaw? You love him? He should be one.
I've got a theory about Luke Shaw, which is where a lot of why do we have all this general bias against Luke Shaw? Yeah. So if I compare Luke Shaw to Jack Grealish, fellow Englishman, Jack Grealish is like really cool, and we like to laugh at him and enjoy his antics and watch him play. And it always feels like it's happening at a distance because I could never know a guy like Jack Grealish. He's unknowable in many ways. Now, English people would probably say, well, you just go to the pub on the corner. You need a billion guys like him. But there's something special about Jack Grealish. Luke Shaw, to me, seems like he seems a little too cool, but in that way where I know many Luke Shaws in my life. Yeah. He seems cool in a very normal way. And I think people look at Luke Shaw and say, why not me? Why Luke Shaw and not me?
That's interesting.
And people hate him for that.
He doesn't look like, even though he's a professional athlete, I'm sure he's in great shape, but he doesn't look like he's in especially good shape. I know he's been maybe unfairly dinged for this his whole career, but there's like an element of just like, I'm sort of with you. It's like, you could like totally like, I feel like he's the kind of guy that there's like 8 of them that I see when I walk out my door of my office to go to lunch, right? And like one of those like rep ties or whatever,
buzz cut and a polar fleece vest, and
exactly. He would totally have one of those Patagonias that has Morgan Stanley on the left side of the patch. Yeah, that's Luke Shaw. That's true. Yeah, but also those guys make like $1 million, right? They're very successful.
That's it. So Luke Shaw, despite all of these things, is still crushing it. And look at him now. He's top 5 of the always cheating supercomputers.
The Gary Vaynerchuk of fantasy.
Yeah, I don't know if any of that served in selling anybody on Luke Shaw. The thing is, just like Luke. I'm not going to start with Luke Shaw, but I will be looking for him in my rearview mirror, like the liquid metal Terminator. Like, is Luke Shaw like sneaking up on me fantasy wise? You have to pay attention.
I think that it depends on how I ultimately settle in, and I really want to have something reasonably settled by the time we do our pod a week from today, our game week 1 preview pod, Brandon. at least be somewhat close to it, which is not always. Sometimes I wait a little too long, and then I don't want that like last week of panic this season if I can avoid it. But I think that if I go double Arsenal or double Man United midfield, I don't know if I'll have Shaw. If I only have a single Man United midfield player, I could see myself possibly having Shaw and Onana to start off the season. It's a nice fixture run for them. 3 home matches in their first 5. They are away to Arsenal and Spurs in there as well. But you feel like you could ride out to a first wild card, a Man United defender or 2 and get away with it. And the thing is, 1 goal and 4 assists is not actually that hugely impressive. I mean, this is what I'm talking about, which is you just always, it feels like he should have a double-digit assist season in his book, right? And the most he's ever had is 5. And it was 3 last year and 4. It was 4 last year, 3 the season before that. He's only scored 2 goals in the last 4 seasons, which seems quite low as well. And so, in some ways, he can't be lower than 5 because he's an attacking player on a very good team and should play a ton of matches. But in some ways, you don't really want him higher than 5 either, because he hasn't quite shown that he has the kind of explosive, next level, otherworldly, and Gabriel, Brazilian Gabriel, who we've got in 4th place, is not explosive, but he's only 5 million, right? He's so cheap, and so that it sort of puts him ahead. And also, he's got way more goal threat than Luke Shaw offers, and so it kind of evens out from that perspective as well.
I'm just going to say tactically, it's Ten Hag wasn't able to try everything that he wanted to try last season because of a shortage of personnel. It looks like they're going to get Rasmus Højlund over the line. So there'll be perhaps more pressing happening up front, which means perhaps they can play a higher line, which is why you pay $50 million for a goalkeeper like Onana. So what's the ripple effect, on the clean sheets for Manchester United? Are they much more vulnerable at the back because they're attacking all the time, sort of like what we were saying about Manchester City? And in that same vein, is that going to help Luke Shaw jump to that higher level, or is he just going to become like a complete pain point for everybody? Yeah. So there's a few unknowns going into the start of the season.
And does some of those changes elevate Malacia possibly as well? Tyrell Malacia, who they brought in last season, got some minutes. He ended up with 14 starts on the season, virtually all of them at the left back spot. So that does maybe offer a little bit of risk. It's kind of the same thing that dinged Andy Robertson in our rankings, which is that there's Liverpool just have a quality fullback in Tsimikas who can and should be starting, right? Not necessarily should be starting for Liverpool, but should be starting. He's good enough to start for most Premier League squads, right? So he got 9 starts last season for Liverpool. So that does it has to ding you a little bit in these rankings too. So it's kind of funny that we have him 5th and we've said nothing but bad things about Luke Shaw, but we do like him in general. But that's where
the buyer beware pod.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll move past Gabriel. Again, I think that the David Raya signing would be awesome if that goes through in the next 2 weeks, which is how long we've got until the season starts. I guess the question is, and I think we can talk about this a little bit now because we didn't actually put Raya onto our top 5 goalkeepers because it was just it's just too chaotic to have him there right now.
No one knows where he is.
No one knows where he is or where he's going.
What are his whereabouts?
Yeah. So the question, I guess, would be if they bring in Raya, does he start? It's so ruthless in a way that I'm sort of impressed by, because this is exactly what happened with Bernd Leno and Ramsdale, right? Yeah. Which is that Leno was quite good, and then they brought in Ramsdale anyway, and so Ramsdale quite good, but has had some weak moments for sure. There's no doubt about it. Even though we all enjoyed watching him on Being Arsenal, it's certainly you could see Raya being an improvement, honestly. And so if he gets in, is he an immediate starter to the point where you trust him? And I guess specifically when it comes to defenders, does Raya's arrival make Gabriel and the other defenders more valuable for Arsenal, Brennan?
I think more valuable. I think it's a combination of you mentioned Gabriel, prone to mistakes. Ramsdale, just you've said it all there. I feel like the more confidence you can bring to Arsenal all over the pitch is just going to make them better in all aspects. And Raya is that. You have to do that to carry yourself through multiple championship campaigns and be as good as he is. Though I still, like, one of the most hilarious moments as a Fulham supporter was Joe Bryan scoring that promotion-winning free kick from like 50 yards out against David Raya, who's completely blind to it. But he's recovered in my estimation. I like you.
This house is a pro Raya. These our respective homes are pro Raya homes. All right, well, let's move on to our top three then, Brandon. I like all three of these players. The first one, maybe a little higher than some people would have expected, but I am very high on him as a fantasy asset this season. That's Virgil van Dijk, $6 million, 8.7% ownership. The premier center back in fantasy, in my opinion. He's stable. He offers goal threat. He's had double-digit clean sheets the last 4 seasons when healthy. Obviously, he missed almost a full season because of the Everton incident. He's had at least 3 goals in his last 4 healthy seasons, and I think it's a little bit like you were saying with Aston Villa, where the way the team is set up and the number of set pieces that they tend to have, both corner kicks and just regular set pieces. He's kind of always in the mix. It gives him a great chance to pick up attacking returns. His form did dip a little bit last season, but I think that's reflected in his price to a degree. I think that the fact that he is down to $6 million is a reflection that they weren't keeping quite as many clean sheets, that he maybe wasn't quite as rock solid back there. I mean, his bonus points were, I guess they were pretty much they actually had the same number of bonus points year over year that he had the season before. But doesn't get a lot of yellow cards, never gets red cards, doesn't really miss a lot of time with injury outside of the one full season. But he's not the kind of guy who gets dinged up very often in general. Basically, because the way that he sort of positions himself, there's like never anyone within about 10 feet of him. Right. So he's sort of, this is the way he sort of sets things up. So that's why I've got Van Dijk third. There is a chance that I go with Van Dijk over Trent in my final squad. It kind of just depends on whether I want to have Mo Salah, because if you have having Salah and Trent, you and I talked about a little bit on the midfield pod, Brandon, but I don't know how you can do it. I really don't know how you can. Yeah, it's very hard to do because obviously you need to have Haaland as well. So what are your thoughts on Virgil van Dijk?
I think he's the new Andy Robertson, in that I have always thought of Andy Robertson as the discounted version of Trent. Now, of course, it's very different with Virgil because he's not an attacking player the way Robertson was. But this is the way you're thinking about him. It's exactly the decision that you just outlined, Josh. It's I can't afford Trent, so Virgil is the next best thing. He's I think, a really good next best thing, and that you're saving you're saving $2 million. $2
million, yeah.
which is huge. And the upside with Virgil that remains when getting rid of Trent is that you're still bought into what I feel will probably be the second best team in the Premier League this season. That's what I'm betting that Liverpool finishes over Arsenal. Is kind of what I'm feeling if everything goes their way. So there are so many clean sheets, and Marlon, if you're listening, if you want to, I'll bet you that Virgil van Dijk scores more points than Tyrone Mings this season.
Is he a Mings head, or are you just putting Mings on him? That's
I'm just forcing him to take Mings in that bet.
Yeah. I bet he's going to score more points than Rico Henry this season. What do you think about that?
So I think So that's the way. That's the interesting part of the exercise, that where we've got the weighted factors, and the value portion of Van Dijk is what has just inflated him up these rankings. Yeah,
and he's only 29 points. He only scored 29 points fewer than Trent last season. So we're not talking about a absolutely dramatic difference. And I don't know exactly how many respective matches both of them missed from. I guess I can just actually look. Let's see. So Trent had 34 starts last season. Van Dijk had 32. Right. So, I mean, 2 fewer starts and still only 29 points away from Trent. So it's not. And we'll see. I mean, let's hold off on getting too in depth in Trent. He may appear higher up in these rankings, Brandon. We'll have to just wait and see there. I think the one question with Liverpool is Do they have a defensive midfielder or what? Like Fabinho is now in Saudi Arabia. Even though the game is still listing him there, again, they have to announce these changes faster. I feel like Brandon. He's what's his ownership at? He's he's at 0.1% Fabinho, so he's not really hurting anybody. But I'm looking at this squad right now. Who is playing as a defensive midfielder for them? Is it going to be Hart? I don't even really know. Is it?
I saw Curtis Jones had started earlier today.
Yeah.
They played Leicester and waxed them 4-0, and it was Curtis Jones. McAllister would probably be a little more advanced than your last midfielder.
Yep. Harvey Elliott's a little more advanced typically as well. I don't know. Does Gakpo suddenly go back there and play? I mean, genuinely, there's 2 weeks to go, and Liverpool don't have a defensive midfielder. So, how much should that be worrying us when it comes to, or is it going to be Trent? There's some the talk going to be Trent has to kind of fill in the DM spot for a while. Which there's a kind of logic to it. You just have him as kind of a sweeper back there, and then he gets to come up on corners and set pieces. Maybe that works.
I mean, but Trent's worst aspect is breaking up play. He cannot tackle a person to save his life.
That's true. That is true.
He needs to exist in space.
That's true. So, does it make sense to make him even more important as a defender? Yeah. I don't know. I think that is the one question. I think that's honestly a thing that is a factor with Trent as well at $8 million. Is there a concern that they're just not going to be quite strong enough defensively? Is the attack so good that it forgives that part of it? But obviously, you do want to have, you would like to have a solid number of clean sheets from your defender, right? And I mean, they only had 10 last year. I mean, Trent only had 10 last year. So I don't know. Is that a factor for you at all? Are you considering that? I know I'm kind of jumping ahead here a little bit, but it's relevant, I think, as we're talking about Liverpool. What do you think about? Do we think basically? Is there any reason to think that they're going to be more stable defensively than they were for much of last season, which was pretty unstable?
I guess the case I would make for them being more stable is. Fabinho is just so poor. Addition by subtraction. That's kind of a poor way to answer that question. But I think going back to the whole case for or against Brentford is making Liverpool again more whole on all aspects of the pitch. I think helps them defensively if they could just hold more of the ball, control the pace of the game, which it was just so chaotic. And I think if bringing in a younger, fresher midfield is, whether it's defensive or not, is going to help the defense.
I think that's probably true, but they do need somebody to play in that spot, and so I would hope in the next couple of weeks we get a little more clarity on that. It's too bad they're not playing in the Community Shield. That would be a useful thing to see how they lined up in that. But we should have at least, I don't know what their friendly schedule looks like. We should have at least a couple more matches to assess. It looks like we're starting to see something closer to realistic versions of what the team might look like. I don't know if you saw Man City's team sheet today, but they were really. It looked like a full strength squad. They were playing everybody. You had Holland and Foden and Alvarez all starting in their lineup. So it's kind of interesting.
And Ruben Diaz scored a goal, who we should have mentioned as well.
Ruby. All right, so we got 2 more to go here. Number 2 is Estupinan. I always want to add an extra syllable to his name for some reason. He's $5 million, 51% owned. Incredible value at 5 million. Really, it should probably be 5.5. Only probably dinged by the game because it doesn't have enough historical data to back him up. 1 goal, 7 assists. Links up so well with the forwards. You and I talked at the beginning of the pod about the Newcastle Brighton match that we saw this on Friday night, and he was one of the best players in the pitch. I thought that the whole team looked really good. Casado looked really good as well, and I thought Matoma was really solid. But just seeing Estupinan just absolutely bossing it down the left was really, if there was any doubt about whether he was going to be in my squad, I'd say of any of the players we talk about in this week's pod, the one that is an absolute mortal lock to be in my squad is Estupinan going into game week 1.
Yeah, I don't think there's too much more to say beyond that. Incredible value, really attacking, great player. I'm already the season hasn't even started, and I feel like I'm eating my words from the end of last season, where I predicted Brighton was going to have a huge downturn this season. But seeing how they've played through the preseason, just what we said at the top of the pod, how well drilled, every player in that squad is, they're going to be ready.
I feel like if you're listening to this pod and you haven't watched a ton of Premier League in the past and you were looking for a club to support, I think that Brighton would be a club that could make the cut for you. Maybe not threats to win the league, but exciting. They buy really well. They're kind of very, very little risk, you'd imagine, in the next handful of years to be at any kind of relegation threat, right? Just like a very solid, well-run club. So, we'll see if they keep De Zerbi. I guess that's the one question, but let's certainly not this season. I think they'll be fine. All right, that brings us to number one, Trent Alexander-Arnold. We started talking about him already. The man, the myth, et cetera, et cetera. He's so consistent: 2 goals and 12 assists, and then 2 goals and 11 assists in the last 2 years. So every year you're going to get 2 goals and double-digit assists from him, and he's just and honestly, you maybe would expect him to score a little more than he has so far. And the price is insane, $8 million. Has not affected his ownership so far. He's already at 29% ownership. But the question, as you and I were talking about a little bit, is where will he play? Is he for sure a right back? Or does he get slotted in somewhere else? I mean, he was kind of playing in the midfield near the end of last season. Seemed like that worked out, but I mean, can you just keep dropping midfielders? No Henderson, no Fabinho, and that's still okay. I mean, he's just not a great defender. So I think that is the concern.
He is a game week killer. That's his thing. If you don't have him in any given game week, he'll bury you. So this is, and maybe that's managing out of fear, but I think Trent is big in the fun factor quotient, because to have him when he does have those, shoot the moon game weeks, it's sensational. You shoot up the OR so fast. So I'm leaning toward figuring out a way to have him, which I think for me is ultimately going to mean I won't have Salah. As of this,
and he's never been a game week killer, right?
Well, yeah, it's like, I know. I mean, you could see it many different ways. I don't know.
Yeah, this is you get to a good point. I know you made this point on Thursday's pod, but we'll say it again, because this is, people start to. If you're in any kind of network, Twitter, Reddit, whatever, and you're starting to see a lot of people comment and build teams, there's a feeling that starts to evolve, like, oh, it's all, everybody's priced too low, we're all going to have the same team or whatever. But I think the Trent and Salah argument alone highlights that it really is pretty tricky. I think outside of, there are a couple low prices. Someone like Bruno is probably a little cheaper than he should have been, a Stupinan, and that's reflected in their high ownership, Stupinan in particular, 51%. But I think in general, I am definitely struggling to have all the good players in my team, and I feel like I'm forced to make some really difficult cuts. And it's exciting to me. Like, I think it's really fun because we have 2 weeks to go. I don't even know what formation I'm going to play this season, and I think that's a good sign. There are some signs, for last couple seasons, big at the back was a huge thing. Go heavy on defenders. Not seeing too much of that right now. Although again, the team I have right now is a 4-4-2, but I think you could make an argument for, I think you can make, honestly, a compelling case for having one expensive forward and going with a 4-5-1. I think that would be a viable strategy. Just have Haaland up front too. So there's lots of different ways to go, I think, going into this season.
I agree. Okay, so I think we've set our piece on defenders. So it's a pretty good ranking. Stupinan is the one really standing out to us here, I think, and then in a little Liverpool sandwich.
It's exciting, though. I mean, the fact we listed 10, we could have listed 10 more, right? A ton of good defender options. So let's take a break, and we're going to discuss our top 5 goalkeepers.
Great.
All right, Brandon, we're back. Goalkeepers, top 5. couple opening notes. Mentioned this a moment ago, but just to recap, Ray and Ramsdale, the situation keeps them both off the list. There's just too much uncertainty here. If we were doing a top 10, they would both be on it. But at the moment, I mean, because I don't see Ramsdale being a backup all season. So if Raya came in and immediately supplanted him, I would imagine that that Ramsdale would go somewhere else, right? I think that there's certainly some clubs looking for replacements. And in fact, I'd say that's a big theme. I was surprised by just how many clubs have an unsettled situation at goalkeeper right now. You could look up and down and find a number of clubs in that position. Did you see, by the way, that Mendy has now moved? I think is he in Saudi Arabia too?
Yes.
I think he's one of the
that deal is done.
Yep. That deal is done. So Kepa actually just missed the cut for the top 5. I think he came in 6th.
He can't catch a break, this guy.
He can't catch a break, but he was a good own the last half of last season. I thought he deserved a little extra shout out here because he was like one of the most widely, I don't know, it's not even a fantasy thing so much with him, but just he was kind of a joke for a couple of years there. And but the second half of last season totally redeemed himself, at least from a fantasy perspective. Comes in at $5 million. And again, we think that a lot of the instability that dogged Chelsea last year will get resolved under Pochettino. Yeah. And in general, these players are priced to buy. And so, and I think that includes Kepa at $5 million.
Yeah. And then we have a 4.0 goalkeeper to think about with Alphonse Areola at West Ham. Mm-hmm. Is it finally time to sunset Fabianski? Now, if I've learned anything over the years, Josh, going back to his Swansea City days, never count Fabianski out. He's ageless like Dorian Gray. I think having Areola, let's call him Areola, on your bench is probably a good move at 4.0 because that could turn into a big value pick. And then would you in that case consider going 4.0 goalkeeper if Areola was a regular starter for West Ham?
Yeah, I would consider that. I feel like I maybe did that at last season with I don't know. That didn't actually work out great because Ward was such a
the Leicester rotating keepers.
Yeah, the Leicester rotating keepers. But let's get into our top 5 here, and we can talk a little bit more about it because I think that there's a lot of different price ranges to consider here, and I think number 5 is kind of for long-time listeners know this, but for anyone new to the pod this year, Brandon has always had a little bit of a fetish for expensive keepers, and it's like you recognize that it's a problem. You've talked to many people about it over the years, and you've sought help for it, and yet you have fallen back on it year in and year out. And this year you've sworn up and down, no more expensive keepers. That's over. Those days are in the past. Are you cracking? Are you still holding firm? What's your thinking right now on expensive keepers?
It's like any problem. You don't solve the problem. You just go into recovery. So sort of like once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. You're just in recovery. So I'm in recovery right now, and I have said I'm not going over 5 million, and 5 million I'm treating as a luxury move this season.
Yep.
I feel like that's just like a half measure. Okay, so I find it very confusing that there used to be 6 million goalkeepers, and those have been eradicated from the game
somehow.
So I feel like we don't premium goalkeep the way we used to premium goalkeep. So so we're kind of like what used to pass as premium goalkeeper back in the day no longer does. So going down to 5 million just does seem like a super half measure. It kind of encapsulates my feelings overall about our whole defensive conversation. Is I'm finding it very difficult to really zero in on what I think about how clean sheets are going to shake out this season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I'm also kind of trying. I'm failing to care that much.
Yeah,
I just want goals and assists. That's really all I want.
The Man City thing last year really knocked a lot of people for a loop, right? The fact that they just were consistently dominating teams and then conceding one cheap goal every week. So the stats continually looked incredible for them. They looked like a great team, and yet week in and week out, it was just not happening for them. And so, yeah, I think that in general, a good rule of thumb with goalkeepers is find a good mid-table keeper at 4.5 if you can do it, and then cover him with a 4 million. I am leaning a little bit towards Onana at the moment, I have to say, but let's get into our top 5 because I don't want to give too much away here. So number 5 is Pope at 5.5 million. I honestly feel like you could put Ederson or Allison in here, right? It's like they're like the three-headed 5.5 million group. They're probably too expensive to own. They're not quite worth it when you can get honestly as many points for cheaper. You can just get it's not even a value thing. You can literally get as many, if not more, points for cheaper. But he's probably too expensive to own. But you don't have to worry about your goalkeeper again all season, most likely. Pope is the reason Pope's fifth instead of the other two is just. I suppose we should factor in Ederson's assist. Ederson has assist threat, Brandon. We have to remember that. Yes. Somehow it gets like one assist a season. But Pope gets saves, and that has held true. It was very true when he was a nice, affordable keeper at Burnley, but it's held true even at Newcastle as well. And so I think that is a little bit of a tiebreaker. If you just want the premium keeper, you never have to worry about it again. Although honestly, Ederson was barely starting down at the end of last season, so. Who knows?
Having Ederson, I had him for a double game week because, in theory, he was the safest, least rotation prone, and he didn't start either of those matches. It was really one of the most incredible things that's ever happened to me in fantasy or in life. The myth of goalkeeper safety, right? Yeah. Because not only do you get security of starts, not always, but you also don't even get security of returns because sometimes you're better off just. I feel like this happened with one of my defenders last season where it was like they conceded 5 goals, but they got an assist and a bonus point somehow, because they were like really involved in the attack. And it's like, that's why defenders ultimately just matter more than keepers in the game because they can just blind luck their way into random assists and bonus. So Pope is fifth. Leno is the next two are both our 4.5 million. Take your pick options. We've got Leno in fourth and Pickford in third. Leno's at 4.5 million, 9% owned. Pickford's at 4.5 million, 14% owned. Leno's case, a ton of saves last year, 144 saves for Leno, and 8 clean sheets. And I guess the question, and you're a Fulham supporter, so the question to me is, or to you is, is the squad good enough to keep clean sheets, or are saves alone enough to own him? We only have one healthy center back right now, Issa Diop. Yeah. We got Tosin Adebayor. He's leaving the club, presumably. Okay. Tim Ream's still injured. Okay. So I don't know, but Leno was arguably Fulham's best signing last summer, and he made some points-saving saves. It's incredible. And the thing from a fantasy perspective that you'd like is, being on a weaker team with a worse defense, he's going to face a lot of shots. And therefore he's going to get a lot of saves. So if you never get a single clean sheet out of Leno, you're still going to see a number of 3 and 4 point returns game week to game week, which I think is good. I just think Fulham, like their prospects, do not look good enough at this point going into the season for me to argue for Leno. So the case for Pickford, who we've got above him, is too, and we've tried not to get too focused on early season matches here, but I do think with goalkeepers, it's something to at least talk about on this pod because he's got a really strong start to the season. You could absolutely set and forget Pickford up until you play that first wild card, right? Even if that wild card isn't played until December, I think you'd actually honestly be pretty solid with having him. Because even some of their trickier matches are home matches, so you could at least maybe expect some save points there. But the case for Pickford is solid keeper, solid history, affordable at 4.5 million. He's been priced
In fact, he was 5.5, 5.5, 5, and 5 the last 6 seasons. So this is honestly, it's the cheapest he's been in half a decade. They've had an entire summer under Sean Dyche to get better, get stronger. I really am a believer in Dyche as a manager. I think he's very strong. I think he was a great hire for Everton. I know they barely stayed up, but I just feel like long-term, Dyche is going to be the right guy. That they have a solid defense in front of them. You know, Tarkowski, I rate, and Ashley Young is there now getting some minutes. That was surprising to me. I hadn't realized that until I was getting ready.
What
for
business?
spot.
Is that like the only business Everton have done this summer? It feels like I want to hear a little bit more going on there.
The whole squad, right? Yeah, it's like what's going on with Calvert-Lewin, what's going on, across the board. But Michaelenko, I rate, and even Keane is. So there's like a number of it's a solid defense, and they just should be better than they were last season, right? There's enough talent in this squad to be better than they were, and so it's. I don't know. So I think that at 4.5, if you wanted to pair him with Areola in hope that maybe Areola ends up becoming the starter this season, I don't think that's a bad pairing to start the season with. I mean, what do you think about Pickford?
Yeah, he's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's definitely I don't want to think about it sort of a fantasy
Totally.
pick, which I think is justifiable here.
All goalkeepers are bad. Give me a cheap one, right? Like that's a decent. That's honestly a decent way to think.
Yeah. He's like wearing sweatpants to work. Having Pickford in your fantasy team is like wearing sweatpants to work.
Well, that implies that you've given
what are you going
up.
to do? Fire me?
I feel like that implies that you're giving up. It's more just like I'm going to take my precious 100 million pool of money and spend it elsewhere, and I'm just going to throw this guy in there because we don't actually know if Ariel is going to start. So you can't.
You're like the rich guy who drives around in a really crappy car.
Yeah, it's like the Warren Buffett move. Yeah, exactly. So, all right, that brings us to our top two. You got Onana at 5 million, 18% ownership. Interesting signing. He reunited with Eric Ten Hag. He managed him up until I guess it was 2 seasons ago because he spent last year at Inter Milan, helped guide Inter to the Champions League final. He is arguably the best route now into the Man United defense. He is a modern keeper, right? And so it's sort of like they have 11 outfield. It's a little bit like Ederson, right? Where it's a big change from what they had in De Gea. De Gea is the classic shot stopper goalkeeper, and in Onana it's more of the like he'll come out, he'll distribute, and obviously that sometimes looks scary, but ultimately it's what you want out of your modern keeper. So
yeah,
what do
for
you think
bonus
about
points
Onana?
too? You get pass completion with a modern keeper. So I could see him getting a number of bonus points. The thing I find appealing about Onana is, let's talk about. I'll talk about that when we get to our number one goalkeeper pick. But I like him. He's currently in my draft. The 5 million price tag. I think everyone was just hoping he was going to be 5 million because then that solves the Manchester United coverage problem, such as it is.
Yeah.
I just feel like the value is going to be pretty high, and that's how one could justify going up from a 4.5 keeper to Onana's. You're actually going to get something for that money.
I think it's interesting that he isn't number one, and so I think we can take him and number one together here as well. So number one. And listen, we're surprised he's this high too, but this is what the numbers spit out at the end. The number one keeper for always cheating going into the 2023-2024 season. The last player we're going to discuss these preview pods, Brandon, is Emi Martinez. 3 consecutive seasons, double-digit clean sheets. We're banking on continuous improvements under Unai Emery, and he does get an extra bump for the fun factor. This podcast, Brandon, will never, to a certain degree, not be about having fun.
Correct.
And who's more fun than Emi Martinez?
No one.
I love him. I know some people hate him, but even if you hate him, you love to hate him, right? It's like
he's a heel.
He's exactly. And I just like him. I'm just a huge fan. I've always liked him. He's a former Arsenal player, and then it was a summer ago when he won when they won the Copa America with Argentina, and he was just doing every trick in the book, right, and just celebrating and gesticulating. And it was just fun. And I was like, I just like players who are fun. I increasingly I want to enjoy myself. And I think that he's also a very good fantasy asset, though. He's consistently top 5 in points every single season. He's not crazy expensive. I mean, right? He's $5 million. He's got a strong track record. I think, historically, I'm just, comparing him to Onana. I mean, ultimately with Onana, it's just, it's his first year in the Premier League, right? So there is a little bit of speculation. And maybe that's what dinged him just a tiny bit in terms of, and moved him from second to first. But, historical performance, he rated out really highly. High ceiling, he's up there. He wasn't quite at the very top, but he was up there. He's got a high floor as well. We all know that even in a bad match, he's going to get you 3 or 4 points. Value is fine. Squad quality improved from previous years, right? And then you rate it really highly on the fun to own category. And there's very little risk of injury, rotation, suspension, anything like that. He is their number one, very clearly.
He's an excellent shot stopper. So you go back to the Pope argument and the Leno argument of consider them for fantasy because they're going to get a lot of save points. And the beauty of Martinez is he plays on a better team that's going to create a poorer shot selection for the opposition. So Emi Martinez is going to get a lot of easy saves, especially as the team continues to get better. What I don't like about Emi, where I like Onana more, is if I want to buy into both the Villa defense and the Manchester United defense, it's cheaper for me to get a 4.5 Villa defender plus Onana versus going Emi Martinez and 5.5 for Luke Shaw, say.
Yeah,
so, it's just more expensive.
That's a great perspective, right? Emi and Shaw is 10.5. Mings and Onana is 9.5. A million is huge in preseason when you're trying to figure this stuff out. And we had Mings very highly on the defender rating too, right? Just go back 30 minutes ago to that discussion of him. So I think that's a really good perspective. I just think in general that Emi is worthy of consideration, and he doesn't tend to get a lot of love, but I think at the end of the season, he's always right up there in terms of points. This year, if you look at points from last season, he's a little bit lower, but part of that is because he spent a month partying very, very hard after Argentina won the World Cup and just wasn't in the squad for several weeks. I think
I'm sure you looked at Grealish's post-Champions League photos and was like, that boy isn't even trying. He should have seen the diabolical things I was getting up to after Argentina won the World Cup.
Exactly. And if it wasn't for the World Cup, I think he would have very easily been in the top 5 for keepers. And so I think, I think again, with it's a little bit like, I think that managers are a huge factor. I think when it's the same thing with Jordan Pickford. I think managers make a gigantic difference, especially when it comes to stabilizing defenses, right? That is maybe like the clearest line you can point to with the new manager is there's certain managers who are very good at tightening things up like almost immediately. And I think that with Deitch and Unai Emery, there's just a feeling that you're probably going to be getting value from players in both of those spots. And honestly, we didn't talk about Everton defenders at all. And maybe that was just like a little bridge too far for us. But they could be relevant at some point, too, early on this season. I could see making a transfer for an Everton defender early on if I just needed to free up some money, right? Go from a 5.5 to a 4.5 to free up some cash for a midfielder or something.
All right. Well, I told you before we started this podcast that I didn't even want to look at the goalkeeper ratings. I was just really not excited to talk about keepers, but I actually enjoyed talking about keepers more than defenders, if I'm honest with you.
Well, it gets into strategy, right? Yeah, it's like, what are you looking for? It's an interesting question.
Yeah, for sure. So it's we spend so much time trying to basically assert this real football fan perspective of well, this player's better, so I want to have him, but can I have him? And then when you get to goalkeepers, it just becomes so much more about real fantasy game strategy. Somehow we're able to think a little bit more clearly about the game versus our feelings about the real life football. So that's true.
It's a smaller pool, maybe, right? Yeah. It's like if you start talking about defenders, it's like a cascading series of thoughts, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, if I go Trent, that means I can't have this midfielder and I can't have this forward. And whereas when it comes to a keeper, you're just picking one, really, right? In most cases. Where I think goalkeeper rotation is not a thing that either of us are really seriously consider anymore. It just has not been proven to be a very effective strategy. It just doesn't really work, and so you're really just better off having one, and hopefully Areola plays. And if not, it's worth the punt to me. You just drop him on your first wild card. Maybe you lose 0.1 million or something, but it's worth it. Because if he does start, then he's going to shoot up in value, and then so it's worth it's a speculative like market move. I like it. All right, on speculative market move. We're ending our pod, Brandon. 3 preview pods in 7 days. It's been fun. It's been very, very immersive. I feel much more ready for the season, and I hope everyone listening feels the same way too. We are going to have several more pieces of content coming out over the next couple of weeks as we get ready for the season. So again, if you want to support the pod, and we hope you do, especially, it's a crazy podcast marketplace out there right now. So Patreon support is really more valuable than it's ever been in order to make sure that we can keep doing this pod. And so you can go to patreon.com/always and support us at any pledge level, right? Even the absolute lowest is still hugely, hugely appreciated. So patreon.com/always cheating is where you can go. Brendan, do you want to thank our producer patrons?
Yeah, big thanks to Mike DePietro, Trevor Ingerson, our buddy Chris Howell, Bob Kuhn, James Holland, Dave Wegner-Lodahl, Nick Wright, Lazaros Llanos, Jesse Halstead, Bruce Kerr, Brian Chin, Blair Jacobson, Todd Byerly, Andy Portlock at FPL Merch, Carrie Swanson, Jefferson Turner, Buffalo Wild Mings, Francis Moore, Sam Shower, Caleb Robbie, Vulgar Paulson Kruger, Alex Holcomb, James Keatley, The Saint, Bob Fox, Craig Jackson, Shalin F. Kadakia, Terrence O'Donnell, Paul Herzig, Heath Cram, Thomas Tislov, Noah and Louise, Travis Grant, Julio Pena, and Linus Vennerstrom. Rate, review, and subscribe. We asked you all to rate us 5 stars on Spotify. Roughly 6 of you did. So, to the rest of you, keep going. Keep pushing. We're on social media, primarily X, at Hail Cheaters. For all this information, including that Super League code, pay us a visit at our website, alwayscheating.com.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you next week. Bye.